This episode of Dispatches from Planet Albany is brought to you with support by New York State United Teachers, which represents more than 600,000 educators and school-related professionals in New York. Dispatches is also supported by the public affairs firm O'Donnell & Associates. For more information, check out o'donnellsolutions.com.
I happen to be in a position where I was privy to some of the stuff going on there with...
Like the planning?
No, just kind of on the outskirts, like, wait till you hear what happens tomorrow. And meanwhile, when the amigos were running there, it was quite a time.
I've also declared war on potholes, so here's the first shot across the bow.
Well, as you know, with Planet Albany, there's always something that makes the planet turn.
And it's this amazing view of D.C., and Eddie Vedder comes out. And he goes, "You have a cigarette?" And I've never smoked in my life, but if I had, I wish that was the moment.
And this strategy takes us from potholes to knotholes.
I would like to say it was a pleasure, Mr. Kim. But I'm on the road.
I'm David Lombardo, and this is Dispatches from Planet Albany, a WCNY podcast about power and politics in New York State government. Back in April, an announcement from statewide public affairs hit my inbox proclaiming that one of the, quote, fastest-growing lobbying firms in the state had just gotten bigger with an addition to their downstate team. This made me curious about the organization's capacity and how they see themselves in the New York lobbying landscape, since the firm is not necessarily a household name or in the top for the compensation of lobbyists here in New York. And to satiate my curiosity, we're lucky to be joined in the studio by Chris Duryea, managing partner for statewide public affairs. Thanks for making the time, Chris.
Absolutely, David. I'm happy to be here. You got me. You ran me down. Here I am.
Well, that was going to be my first question, because that's what I asked Patrick Jenkins when we had him on this summer, which is, what made you comfortable enough to want to talk about the typically opaque world of lobbying?
Well, I mean, I don't really have a problem kind of telling how, we've had a great story at statewide. It's been a bit of us. I mean, it's hard to believe now. It's almost 14 years that we've incorporated under statewide. And this is, I think, God, I don't want to say it, I think this is my 27th session in this building. So, happy to kind of talk about how we've kind of got there, how we've sort of punched above our weight, how we've grown. It's been a ride. It's a grind. I think here in Albany, competing it's a very unique place to compete. And I think that maybe like an MBA professor might want to come in here sometime and just do an analysis, because if you think about a traditional competitive marketplace, right, I'm out there, I'm competing. Where else other than in New York, in this bubble, would I have to disclose what I'm being compensated? Right, my competition knows exactly what I'm being paid.
Sure.
Not only that, they know exactly what I'm working on. It's all publicly available.
Although we don't necessarily know whether you're for or against something, unless you're
true. Yeah.
bad at making intuitive leaps.
Yeah, I think hopefully that you could make that jump. But so it's an interesting place to do business, but it's also arguably it allowed us to grow. I bounced around a couple different firms. Had a small book of business and decided in 2013 to sort of throw out my own shingle. I think we had 7 clients.
Well, let's talk about that founding of statewide public affairs, because you had a interesting mix of experiences. You worked in the assembly, as you pointed out, back in 2000, I think 2003. You had experience lobbying. You had this consultant background. So when you put all that into a blender, what were you hoping that statewide public affairs would do maybe differently than some of the other firms that you'd worked for, or would try to emulate based on what you saw or had experienced?
It was more of a desperation, honestly.
Okay.
I was in a really bad spot. I had my partner. I was at a firm that sort of went Splitsville, and I had to make a decision between which partner to kind of go with. And I went with one, and maybe we had an operating agreement in June. By November, he had fallen down a stairway and basically incapacitated himself. So I was a man without a home. And so it was like, what am I going to do? And I was like, at the time, Cuomo had just been elected, and so I had a couple offers on the table from the new administration, or I could have hung up my own shingle, and I just did it. And that's kind of where we started.
What made you take that leap as opposed to going inside in the warm embrace of the Cuomo bosom?
I honestly, I'm a veteran. I spent some years, believe it or not, on a submarine in the Navy. And I think I learned that, maybe I have authority issues, and I think I was like, I didn't quite know where I was going to land. It was so, I don't know. I guess it was a little maybe more of an entrepreneurial spirit. And I had a real nice little book of business too, and I just didn't want to give up on my clients.
What was then the guiding or motivating spirit that you brought to statewide public affairs and has maybe been your manifesto during the 13 plus years now?
This work isn't easy. It can be stressful. It's just constant crisis, right? And it may not be my crisis. It certainly may not be your crisis, but it's the client's crisis, Mm-hmm. And so there's deliverables. I want a bill. We got to kill this thing. We got to, so there's pressure. And so for me, I'm big on culture in the workplace. I'm big on, look, that same MBA professor, if he came to my office, he would say, wait a minute, the only people that you've hired here are your friends, right? I mean, I think that goes against the 101 of every sort of, business executive. Don't get in business with your friends, but basically I've hired up people that, I know and trust and I'm friends with. So we have a collaborative environment at Statewide, and we like to keep it loose because it's hard coming over here. It's hard coming over here and delivering. And so I want people to come into the office and enjoy themselves and be collegial. And there is no one person that can solve for these issues. And so that's why having an amazing team with us, and this is my time, I give the shout out to my team, both our New York City practice and here in Albany, and we have a Westchester practice that's growing quickly. That's important to us, is to just to keep that collegial atmosphere where, hey, I'm like, hey, help me. I've got somebody in the office I can say, can you please help me with this? We do not exist in silos in our firm. It is a team. We all benefit from it. We all, we have a profit sharing mechanism in the firm to make sure that everybody is motivated to keep all the clients, keep everything moving and to deliver. So
what happens if then things don't go the way you want? What happens if you feel like somebody's not pulling their weight, so to speak? Do you have some awkward conversations with those friends?
I guess I've just been fortunate enough that
hasn't happened yet.
In the early days, I made a lot of mistakes, David.
Like what?
There's a guy who was a mentor of mine from New Jersey. This guy's named David Smith. He's a New Jersey lobbyist, and I'm happy to mention his name because he's a friend and a mentor. And he told me early on, like, Chris, reinvest in your firm, reinvest in your team. And in the early days, just kind of cheaping out, right? You know what I mean? You only have so much revenue, and you have to make, business decisions. And I certainly don't pretend to be one who knew what I was doing at the time. But then you realize this is a people business. Like, you really need to bring on people who know what they're doing, and they're enjoyable to work with, and you know them and you trust them, and implicitly. So I've been very lucky since those early days to take my own advice and bring on some real, some good folks, compensate them well, make sure they're happy, and we're a family. We got people. My kids are, now, I'm starting to get into their teen years, and, we've got, Wayne's, Wayne Lair. Wayne's got the young ones at home. We've got friends. We've got a whole family, so we're really a family business.
Well, I'm curious, given what I mentioned at the top, how your firm, for good and maybe ill is not necessarily a household name and not necessarily always the top in client spending. So how do you go about attracting new business when some of these clients might be looking at, who are people talking about in the media and who's on the top 10 list? Get me on that client list. So what's your pitch you make to those parties?
Well, for us, it's not about being like the top dog. For us, it's about delivering. I think if you looked at our retention rate over the course of the last 10 years, I mean, I can sit here and tell you that my first 2 clients, which I'll just tell you because they've been so good to me, was Comcast and Nucor Steel. I still represent both of them. It's 17 years later. So for us, keeping our existing clientele, we don't have to be the big guy. We don't have to be that. I think that, success is, we don't have a huge marketing, because we don't really need it. We get referrals from our existing clientele. We get, referrals from partners in other states. And so we don't need to be the super big guy,
So you're not out trying to sing for your supper? You're not out trying to drum up new business?
Oh, we do a lot. We do a lot.
And so what are those pitch meetings like when you do have to sell yourself? What do you say? I mean, obviously you talk about retention, I'm guessing, and point to that, but they might not care about the family culture you create or how handsome Wayne is. So what do you sell them on?
Well, I mean, we sell them on results. We feel very confident that we've delivered. Certainly, I think our existing clientele would vouch for us if and when asked. And I do think that we have a very solid book of business of companies and associations and not-for-profits.
It's like blue chip stocks when I look at your list.
Yeah, but we also we represent, we're proud to represent like the New York State Town Clerks Association. It's like that's 900 elected officials, that put their trust into us, and have for a long, long time. And so for us, just having that kind of reputation where elected officials would hire you is important to us. So our pitches, as we've gotten more established, are like we're sort of like we've always pitched ourselves as sort of like the lobbyist, right? Where it's shoe leather. You see us over here, David.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like we are over here pounding the pavement, and maybe it's not the easiest work. The retail on the ground work at City Hall and up here is that's what sets us apart. And I think a lot of those clients just want to have people on the ground.
Do they ever ask if you've got anybody on staff who's like related to anybody or went to college with anybody in a position of power?
Not really.
No one's like looking for that?
Not really.
You're not like, here's Steve Hochul. It's Kathy Hochul's third cousin.
No.
We've got him on retainer.
No, it's funny. I'm a terrible name dropper. I think that probably in some of these client pitches with maybe other, I wouldn't know, but I think for us, it's about the talent. It's about what we've done versus, I know I'm friends with the most overused term in Albany, but yeah, so.
Well, thinking about this recent session, what was maybe the hardest thing to get across the finish line, or maybe hardest initiative to kill? Because that's going to be the other side of this job.
Yeah. Look, I think that this year we had, and look, I could sit here and tell you that it's like all us, this is usually the team effort. Any of these issues require, stakeholder engagement. It's a different time. I think, since COVID, things have changed so dramatically in the lobbying front. We represent the New York State Restaurant Association.
Sure.
I mean, I'm sitting here having like an evil flashback of like on the phone with the governor's office talking about, during reopening of restaurants about how to, roll up forks and spoons with a napkin. You know what I mean? Like
serve some chips with drinks or whatever.
How that
Polo
yes.
chips.
No comment. So, in terms of this year, the SLA reforms to wholesaler liquor fees is a game changer. It's a big deal, and that is consumers are going to see that in the bottom line. I mean, after this, if you want to go get a cocktail, we can talk about how that particular cocktail is impacted by wholesaler fees and setting up a fair, transparent regulatory regime around that is it's a huge deal. And my hats are off certainly to the governor, certainly to the to Lily Fan at the SLA and the entire SLA, and certainly Senator Skoufis and.
But that was something that got done in the context of the budget.
Yep.
And what is that experience like, trying to get things into the budget versus done as standalone legislation? Do you have a preference on where you think you can be more effective?
Depends. Certainly the fiscal issues, we do a lot for not-for-profits, that kind of thing, to make sure that, folks are funded for some great programs and getting legislation over the goal line. I mean, certainly.
But I mean, that's a policy, though. The fees restrictions, that was something they had tried to do regulatorily, got tied up in the courts, and then you got it done with a new statute in the context of the budget. I wonder whether something like that would have even been movable as standalone legislation, given the legislature's kind of intransigence on all things blue law related as standalone bills.
Yeah. True. Good point.
You're not disagreeing.
Not disagreeing.
Okay.
Nope.
Well,
so
coming back to that idea about the changing landscape, I know as a journalist, one thing that has been different for my experience pre-COVID and now is how much of this work is remote, some because it's just convenient to do a Zoom interview, but also because we don't have the same access in this building that we used to. How are you approaching the in-person lobbying versus remote post the pandemic?
I think generally speaking that most clients prefer an in-person engagement, where you can get into a room and you can have, you can talk a little bit beforehand and talk a little bit about, hey, how are your kids? And just the little thing.
Shoot the
shit. Exactly. And so, and that's it just makes for a different conversation. And then when the meeting's over, when you're walking out, you can have, conversation about, hey, oh, by the way, just little things where instead of it's just in a window on the desk. That being said, we have folks who are, for some managing 50 states, and how do you manage these issues? I mean, just throw any of those issues out there that are literally every state is touching on, particularly technology-based issues that are just, how do you get there? And so it's a huge advantage where they can at least engage policymakers remotely.
And there are still people in the halls here, and they have to do that process of handing over a card to the sergeant at arms, hoping it gets to the lawmaker that you want, hoping that they don't ignore you. What's that like? Is it ever humiliating?
That's a great question. I know. And it's funny because everybody in the office can be like, oh my God, that's why you don't come up there, Duryea, half the time when we really got to But getting back to the competitive nature of lobbying, it's visceral, right? I mean, we're all here in the same building. Many times with other firms, we're partnering with other firms to get things done
really
together.
An underrated aspect,
right? Yeah,
what happens here.
Yeah, and so we're all kind of, we team on some things. We're on the other side of issues on others, but we're all kind of stuck in here. And so my red hair and freckles got the best of me back in the early days. Where took some of this to heart. You know what I mean? Okay. Sometimes I ask myself, why do I care so much? But, would literally, I remember I yelled at one, this is years ago, yelled at one lobbyist who kind of hitched his wagon to the bill I was trying to get done. And I remember yelling at him in the Senate lobby. Probably, I think he's probably still mad at me about it. But I think, I had to learn sometimes, what, we're all kind of in this together. And I would hope that, generally speaking, maybe with the exception of him and a couple of others. But, you have to kind of think about the long game here because, next year it could be a completely different issue and you're working together. And so there is a collegiality in this business that I don't think has gone away entirely.
Well, sticking with that long game, what are your hopes and dreams for statewide public affairs? What does it look like, say, 10 years from now? Is there a vision of what you want to be?
Where am I going to be in 10 years? Me? There's probably, but I think, look, the firm has been,
You're not going to be retired in 10 years, are you?
Oh, my God, David, I'm 54. Do the numbers,
yeah.
So Look, I think in this business, one of the things you have to think about is the equity of your business, right? Like, what is the equity of statewide public affairs? What's it worth, right? What are the shares of statewide public affairs? They're really not worth anything. What the value in the firm are the clients and the people. And so if that value is going to, if we're going to keep this thing going, right, we're going to keep growing, then the clients need to feel very good about having all the bases covered and we can deliver for them. And so that moving forward, particularly as I get older and the partners get older, you have to have a bench in this business. And I've seen it numerous times now where, like, you'll have folks who kind of get to the end, they don't know where to go. They don't know what to do with their book. They want to retire. And so for us, like, that's always kind of in the back of my mind. Is
that farm system?
Is having a bench. Yep, having a farm system. And we've been very lucky to have that and bring in a lot of folks who are, they got 20 years to go and they want to build something. They want to be a part of something. So that's important for me. And so that's part of the broader plan for statewide. In terms of growth, we've been talking about opening like a DC office for years and more.
That's got to be something people ask about.
Well, we're doing it. That's the thing. The truth is we're doing a lot of work with the New York federal delegation right now. We can continue to pick up, clients continue to come to us for that. And so. And
do you have a DC office, though?
We do not.
You have a WeWork space that someone's been hitting up?
No, it's all just kind of on the ground here in the DOs. It's like how are we doing things in district to help shape what Congress members and U.S. Senate are thinking about these issues. So it's really kind of, look, we tend to get farmed out on that work from some of the bigger firms in D.C. So that's a growing area. We've also been doing some multi-state work where we're helping clients who are tackling maybe technology issues, right? Like something will pop up in Colorado. What the hell do we do? Help us understand what that means. Who are the people on the ground that we can help? We can direct towards this problem. So we've helped them with a lot of that because we've been in this business long enough, and we've got enough clientele and relationships and network, and where we can kind of say, like, with a couple of phone calls, kind of figure out, hey, here's who you need to be talking to there, and then just kind of start that process and let them go.
You have some high-tech clients, and I think about the lawmakers who are trying to navigate that space, and someone like outgoing Assembly Member Alex Borres is clearly someone who can speak that language, understands it, but the 212 other lawmakers, it's hit or miss. And so you might have the same challenge, though, understanding these issues and being able to translate what you're hearing from the client to the lawmakers. So how have you gotten that team of yours, including John Olson does that work, up to speed? Do you have to have some nerd that you guys turn to and contract with to help out, or is John going to like night school for
John's our nerd.
This? Okay, yeah.
John is our nerd.
Yeah.
Man.
So how do you guys navigate that and also translate it to lawmakers? Or maybe you don't translate it. Could you just bamboozle them?
Well, John really knows those issues well. You sort of saw it coming, right? You kind of saw the AI thing happen, and we were very fortunate to get out in front of that.
It was a couple of years ago now.
I think John's been with the firm now for 3. John and Wayne we kind of laid out a whole emerging technologies practice around John and Wayne. And John ran the Blockchain Association. Before that was the Internet Association Northeast. Before they kind of folded, but so John can really speak to those issues in a real way. But it's resulted in it's been another growth path for us where we were out in front of that 3 years ago, and now you start to see all of this with. I've done a lot of work in the kind of the cable, PSC, energy, environment space, and all of that's starting to kind of really come together, particularly on the data centers issues. So getting back to teamwork inside of statewide, we're getting back to pitching clients. We're able to really pitch them across the board on expertise.
Have you ever run into any client pitches where they say, this firm has XYZ and you just don't have that, and for whatever reason they say, we're going to go to the other people for that. I mean, do you ever get turned down when you're looking for business?
Yeah, we have. I would say, you kind of never know what's out there behind it. And as much as like the DC bubble is its own bubble and the Albany bubble and it's not a real big ecosphere in the government affairs world.
It's small, but
right? There's small, but there's even DC kind of like, so, some client is looking for a New York lobbyist and, her friend over here is a lobbyist. Hey, they're great. You never know, you never quite know. So you put your best foot forward and that's it. So, we haven't won them all, but we've done pretty well here in the last 10 years.
Well, in addition to the pandemic, the other big sea change here at the Capitol was the Senate flipping from Republican to Democrat in 2018 to 2019. And not just flipping, I mean an overwhelming sea change with, I think, 39 or 40 Democrats in that new majority. What was that experience like as you had to go from lobbying the Republican Senate majority to the Democratic Senate majority? And was there any sort of awkwardness to that?
I don't think there was awkwardness. It certainly was a sea change.
No one was like, where were you before? You weren't asking for my votes previously.
I know. Were you going to use those interesting initials, IDC, around this whole thing? We've been able to look. We're a bipartisan firm. We've always been.
Is there still a benefit to that in Albany?
There is.
Because
no doubt about it. Here's my opportunity to give Will Barkley a shout out, you know what I mean, who was one of the true leaders and public servants here in Albany. But I do think that, look, there's stuff that happens back in the district where I may know a Republican legislator up here in Albany, and I may have a client with an issue in whatever, Hamilton County, and hey, do you know somebody up there I can talk to? So there's benefits there, and you get intelligence, and there is benefits there to kind of keep those relationships warm, and certainly on the Democratic side, and as new legislators, you got to spend the time here, and I think that's kind of what we've done, is just having a constant, a presence here is important.
Both conferences bill themselves as member-driven, but I wonder, when you think about your experience lobbying, whether that is the fact, whether you can build up a groundswell of members to pass an issue, or whether ultimately it's the center of the institution, it's the leadership and staff that are more important to lobby.
I think it's all of the above. Having stakeholder engagement, where's labor, where's the business community, where's having all that, and then getting down into into those in district conversations and educating folks is very important. A lot of the decision making around the conferences happens in conference, and so having champions of your issue in conference willing to stand up and say, hey, you know what, this is a problem, or hey, you know what, this is a great bill, or hey, whatever that case is. So I do think they are member-driven conferences here in Albany.
You mentioned SCOOFUS in the context of alcohol legislation, and
I forgot Al Sturpey. It was right at the end. Yeah, so
good plug.
Al, thank you. Yes.
Well, those are both lawmakers who I think are associated with those issues. Are there other lawmakers that you typically turn to for other priorities of yours based on the clients, and are there ones that you particularly enjoy working with? Unless you want to list the ones that you don't like working with, because I'd also be interested in that.
No, I think you always have to defer to the committee chairs, the original jurisdiction of legislation, and you have to defer to leadership, and you have to talk to staff. And so, if you're going to try to run a bill in Albany, that's the first place to go. You have to, you just don't go running roughshod, trying to run roughshod around a committee chair. So that would. But
maybe not run around the committee chair. But there are some chairs who are not maybe the most aggressive or proactive compared to some rank and file members who just, for whatever reason, sink their teeth into certain issues.
No, that's fair. That's fair. You want to have a champion sponsor always. And so it's one of the benefits of retaining a lobbyist is having that history, understanding, hey, like these issues have been important. Hey, this particular legislator, he's a nurse, like he understands these issues, whatever the case may be, but understanding that and what those issues that drive them and what they're interested in. I mean, like, I'm just like anybody else. There's certain policy issues that I think are extremely interesting, and others I'm like, So understanding that's important when you're trying to get a bill moving.
Well, lastly, there is a narrative going around in wake of the primaries that the makeup of the legislature is going to be demonstrably different next year, and thus the chamber is going to have different priorities. Maybe the flow of legislation will look different. Are you anticipating a vastly different lobbying experience in 2027 than you've had, say, the last 6 or 7 years under one-party rule, or the last 4 or 5 years under Governor Kathy Hochul?
I wouldn't say dramatic, but I think, look, you are going to have a lot of new committee chairs. That's gonna change the makeup. Not maybe dramatic is a dramatic term, but like, it's going to be different. It's going to be different, and so you have to understand, particularly, you've been working on these issues. You got a bill out there you've been working on for 3 years. All of a sudden you got a new committee chair, or your sponsor is not there. You got some retail work to do, and ultimately that's what we do. We do that retail work. So I do think it will change next year. I also think that I happen to believe that next year, like the state's fiscal condition is probably, you saw that recent report. I think that might be it might be dominating some of the
Sure.
narrative next year.
Any of the changing of the guard in terms of committee chairs that you think is going to be most impactful? On the Assembly side, we've got transportation, ENCON, corrections, agriculture. On the Senate side, I mean, right now it's Deputy Majority Leader and housing, but you could have a real game of musical chairs if some other people move into certain roles. Like if Shelley Mayer becomes deputy leader, does that open up education? Yep. Who's going to be in finance? Is it Liz Kruger? Is it somebody else? Are there any that you think are particularly impactful, or maybe ones that you're watching like finance that you think will be a really big deal if they open up?
Yeah, of course, finance. Our clientele, like we're doing so much work across the board now that probably all of it matters to us. Candidly,
even corrections. Okay.
Don't make me go there. But yes, we do some work in that space.
Man, now I got to look up your client list.
Look it up. I know. Just do it after this.
Sure.
Yeah. It's all going to be relevant, and it's all going to require a whole lot of engagement on the ground. I can't quote you the stat, but if you went, I would wonder what the turnover is like in the Assembly over the course of the last 10 years.
Oh, it's wild.
It's got to be incredible.
I was doing a look at the seniority of the 2012 members because I have a soft spot in my heart for that group since I worked for Santa Barbara, who came in 2012, and there are only 13 members, assuming things go as expected in the fall, only 13 members with more seniority than that class of 2012.
Is that right?
And that's crazy to me.
I believe it.
That's just crazy.
But it's just nuts.
Yeah,
it's
and
nuts.
Even on the Senate side, the people who have more experience than that tidal wave of 2018 is really just a handful now, and that's why you're potentially looking at a 2018 member being the next Senate Finance Chair, which...
That's hard to believe. It really is. But then again, I've been here for too many years, but...
27?
27. My first session here was 2000.
Were you here for the Bragman coup?
I was here for it.
Do you remember that well?
Oh, do I remember it well. I'll tell you a little story.
Please.
And this isn't teed up. I was working for a guy by the name of Richard Brodsky at the time, and Richard was, he at the time was ENCON chair. And when it started to go down, there was a meeting of... Bragman had held a meeting. I don't know if you remember the old Amo Labella. Do you remember Amo Labella? It's down. It's gone now, but it was this great little hole-in-the-wall Italian place down on Beaver Street, right next to the MVP arena. And they had a meeting there, and I got a phone call from Brodsky saying, "Get down there and write down license plate numbers." And I got down there. And so I got down there, myself and this other guy, this communications director, and they were all gone, So we went in there and we're like looking around, kind of talking. That's my big story. I was the secret agent who got dispatched to write down license plate numbers of cars that weren't there. So
I'm assuming Brodsky was a silver guy.
Yes, staunchly, yeah.
So no pitch to Richard from the Bragman team to try to come on board. You're practically upstate, Richard. Don't you want an upstate leader?
Not there. No, not there.
For now, we've been speaking with Chris Duryea. He's the managing partner for Statewide Public Affairs. Chris, thanks for visiting us in the studio.
Appreciate it, David. Anytime.